We'll be starting up here in a couple of minutes, top of the hour. Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We'll give folks about 20-30 seconds to sign in, and then we'll get started. Meanwhile, if you want, you might want to go ahead and open up your chat pod, your Q&A pod, and get ready to do the poll EV stuff that we typically do with these. I see someone's raised their hand. Hello, Daniel. Good morning. Okay, so good morning and welcome to one of our Y foundational webinars, whatever you want to call it. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the New York State LTAP, Corner Local Roads program. And today we're going to be talking about alignment and intersections. Really, it's the alignment of intersections, probably could have called it, but again, it's foundational. We're trying to cover some basic stuff. Before we get started, let's cover a couple of the basics for everybody. Again, if you haven't been on one of these before, your audio settings are down the lower left. Make sure you can hear everything. The chat pod, we do ask you to open that even though it is disabled for you to put information in. That's where we'll put things like links to a handout that we've got for you and a link to the poll EV. You don't have to type everything in, any messages we've got for everybody. We may ask you to raise your hand to answer a question now and then. It's also near the bottom. And then the Q&A, and that's where you'll be able to put in your questions during the Q&A, other than the ones that we do via the poll EV. So I'll use those, both the raising the hands and the Q&A throughout the course of the hour we're together. This particular webinar is worth one professional development hour here in New York State. Just because of what we're asked to do by the education departments, it's only the person who is registered. So you've got multiple people in a site, that's great, but only the person registered can get the professional development hour, and you have to stay on for at least 90% of the session. And it is counted as a course for those who care versus educational activities. You'll get a certificate after this session if you're here 3/4 of the time, but if you need the PDF, just let us know and we'll send that back out to you. If you're not from New York State, you'll need to check with the LTAP Center in your state to see what the rules are, whether you get engineering continuing education credit. So let's start with, we'll have a little bit of a welcome. And again, there is a handout. The handout sort of outlines what we're going to be doing and has a list of all the webinars that are available and gives you some resources associated with today's topic on intersections. And if you open up the chat pod, it should be in there, a link to that. Now, we're going to be using poll EV during the course of the hour. So again, you need to go to that website, or if you've got a smartphone, you can download an app and put it right on your smartphone and go from there. Okay. So let's start with, and I don't know if I did this already, so I'm going to come over here and see what we've got here for working. I'm not sure I cleared everything, so maybe getting some duplicate names from last week, but that's my problem, not yours. But today we got a lot of people working for the weekend. Maybe the hot weather is making people think that way. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we got quite a bit. I'm not surprised we got quite a few city folks here. Okay, that's not totally surprising. Okay. And this one, let me clear this one in. Stand by. I'm going to clear this one. I thought I cleared it last night, but you know, sometimes when you do this, you don't do so. I'm clearing the responses. They're going to make you do it again. Okay, reset them back in there. So where are you? What is your job? Are you an administrator, highway superintendent, an engineer, field crew, supervisor, board member? None of the above. If you put none of the above, type it in the Q&A so I can get a sense of what your title or what your job is. And you've got mostly engineers, which isn't surprising. But it's nice to see a variety of folks. Okay. Facilities manager. Oh, okay, cool. And again, if you can't access PoEV, throw it in the Q&A, at least help me out. I can pass the answers on. So for instance, I had someone put in that they're an engineer, that's fine. Okay. And then where are you from? Once the computer wakes up. And again, let me, I don't know why, again, I cleared it last night, so I'm going to clear it again here. Stand by. And I'm going to make you redo it. I know, I'm a meanie. Okay, let's see where you're from. Okay, a couple out of Rochester, downstate, Albany, most of the North Country. Okay. Okay, we got a variety of folks from all over the place. That's cool. I like it. Okay, and we have someone who said they're from Ohio. Okay, Poughkeepsie added to it. Okay, cool. Okay, good. Got a good variety of folks. About 50 of you on here. And so gives me a sense of what we're talking about today. The webinars we've got, today's webinar is on intersections. Next week, we're talking about communication tools, gravel and base, the stuff underneath your pavement. We'll talk about that on the 9th. Maintaining the fleet on the 16th, and then snow and ice to end the summer series on the 23rd. Okay. We'll be then starting up our fall workshops, and I'll be talking a little bit about one workshop that's also coming up relatively soon related to today's topic. So keep that in mind. Not everything we're talking about comes from our workshop on solutions for safer roads and streets, but it is one of the references, and I would ask you to look at that. There's a link to it in the handout, and you can also get a hard copy from us if you're interested. So you can look at that. Some very good information, a lot more than we're going to be able to cover today, but something you might want to look into. Okay. Now, as we get started, you may have heard this from me before. We talked about this in traffic safety. I talked about it at the highway school. It's a new idea, but it's not really new, from the Federal Highway Administration, called safe systems. And the idea behind safe systems is we look at everything, not just in individual silos, as we may have done in the past with the 4 E's, but really sort of combined efforts. So we want safe road users, maybe with a little bit of education, but also helping them understand how to be safe with their vehicle, how to use it. What is a safe speed? What makes a safe road? How do we deal with post-crash care? As highway officials, how do we make safe roads? By helping the user, by helping understand what vehicles are using it, and working with law enforcement and emergency services to keep people safe. The idea behind this is to create some redundancy so that one mistake doesn't lead to a serious crash that could lead to a serious injury or fatality. And so by having that redundancy in place, we stop these things from happening. And if you think about it, look at the disasters that we talk about. Most of them happen because of multiple things going on. And if we can stop even one, we can keep the crash from occurring in the first place. Okay, so keep that in mind as we're talking about intersections, but actually just keep it in mind when we're talking about safety in general along the highways. Now, the goal for today is intersections and the alignment therein. So in the Q&A, not Q&A, excuse me, in the PoEV that's up on screen, type in what you think the goal of a good intersection are. What makes a good intersection? Safe, okay, good, yeah. That would be something I think we can all agree upon. Okay. Clear sight lines, that will help with safety, and some other things that I'm hoping I see in the goals list. Could be a pedestrian focus. Okay. We got to deal with all the users. Okay. It should be simple. I see people throwing the Q&A. That's good. Clear to understand, clear assignment of right of way when you're coming up on it. Good visibility. Okay. Should get capacity, clear traffic quickly, somebody put in the Q&A. Great. That really is a capacity issue. We need to be able to get vehicles through it safely and all the users through it. Okay, easy to navigate. Yeah, accounts for all the users, smooth flow. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we all are on the same page on what makes a good intersection. Okay. Who uses our intersections? So type in, we're going to create a little Wordle. Who uses our intersections? Let's just see what y'all come up with. I'm curious on this one. Who uses our intersections? And again, you can put in the Q&A if you don't have any other way. Cyclists, pedestrians, somebody put cyclists in the Q&A, bikes, cars, could be vulnerable users, motorcycles, traveling public, people. Okay. All modes of transportation. Yeah, all modes of transportation. In fact, emergency vehicles, squirrels. I've seen things where ducks and some animals actually use the crosswalks. They seem to be smart enough to know when the lights are right. What's interesting is you haven't put in here one of the vehicles that actually figures out into the design of intersections. I do see wide vehicles in there, but think about trucks of all sorts. We still deliver 80 to 90% of our goods via truck. So that's something you want to keep in mind is all these users that exist, we have to figure out how we combine them all together, okay? So we're talking a lot today, people are talking about bikes and pedestrians, but we still have cars, we still have buses, we still have trucks. And it will vary depending on where you are in your community. Urban versus rural can make a difference as well. Now, when we talk about intersections, even in an urban area, if you look at percentage of the mileage of the roadway, intersections are a small percentage of the mileage, okay? In a rural area, like we have on our little diagram from our class, intersections are a small percentage of the length of the roadway or the length of the streets, if you look at center line length, okay? But let's just think about that. What percentage of crashes occur at the intersections? Is it 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, or 60% of all crashes? What percentage occur at intersections? Let's see what y'all come up with. Most of you are saying 60%. Now, this is national statistics. It varies quite a bit by different agencies, and your agency might be different, but let's just see what y'all come up with here. I'll take a sip of my coffee. Most of you were saying E, okay? Almost 2/3 of you said E. Turns out, actually, it's about 40% of all crashes occur at intersections nationwide. However, over 50% of the fatal and serious injuries occur at intersections, okay? That's really the place where most of the serious crashes occur. The ones that are not at intersections that are serious tend to be run off the road or involve pedestrians and cyclists away from intersections, okay? But run off the road is a pretty serious one away from the intersections. At intersections, we deal with other ones. We deal with different types of crashes. So what kind of crashes do we worry about at intersections? So again, let's see what we come up with. What kind of crashes do you have to deal with? Right angle turn crashes, yeah. Okay, rear ends that are fatal, T-bones, okay. Yeah. Angle crashes, blind crashes, rear enders. Somebody put pedestrians into the Q&A, yeah. Pedestrians is an issue, wrong way, okay. There's all kind of different crashes, side swipes, all kinds of stuff that we can deal with. And there's some very good information, by the way, on the types of crashes that we can deal with on that federal hybrid link that's in the handout. It's an FHWA webpage on intersection safety, and there's some good ideas for low-cost safety improvements there. And again, we'll talk about a workshop we're bringing to New York if we can get the numbers up. But let's look at an intersection. We're just going to look at a simple four-way, and let's look at the conflict point. So if you think about it, if you're coming down the road here, and we'll see if my pen wants to wake up here. But if you're driving down the road and you're going straight, okay, you got another vehicle coming this way from the left. There's a conflict point where those two vehicles could hit, okay? That's a crossing kind of conflict. That's not a good one. That's actually the more serious kind of crashes that we can deal with, okay? We could also have a kind of crash where you want to turn right, and as you slow down to turn right, the person behind you comes in and creates a conflict point there. We call that diverging. Rear end is a very common one in that particular case, especially when you have a stop control type situation where someone has to stop, either through a traffic light or even a yield sign, and the vehicles don't give them room and they hit. Okay. At low speeds, they're just fender benders, property damage only, but at high speed, they could get pretty serious. Okay. And then, of course, there's merging one, because as you're turning right, you're coming along, there's another vehicle coming in here, and if you don't see them, you can hit into each other, or merging, side swipe, as you all mentioned. Okay. So these are all the kinds of crashes that you could have. And so let's erase the ink on the slide. And let's just show this with a little drawing. So you can see, if we do it all up as typical four-way intersection, we're dealing with 32 vehicle conflict points. Okay. And a lot of them are crossing type of maneuvers, which are the more serious, the more likely to lead to serious and or fatal injuries, especially as high speed comes up. So the middle of the intersection is the dangerous point, something to think about. And that's just vehicle with vehicle. But of course, we have crosswalks. Now, here in New York State, if I have an intersection, even when there's not a marked crosswalk, it is a crosswalk by New York State vehicle and traffic law. Okay. I don't technically have to have the stripes, but the stripes really help. They improve safety. They make it easier for everybody to understand what is the safe places or safer places to walk, and really does a good job in terms of delineating the intersection. So crosswalks are really valuable, but they add, of course, to our conflict points. So we've got all those conflict points before, but we also have additionally all the conflicts where vehicles are crossing the crosswalks. And each time you have that crosswalk, you're going to have 6 conflict points. Now, some people say, well, there's only 2, because you've only got the traffic going, right here. Come on, pen, there you go, pen. And here, crossing that crosswalk at the bottom. But realize, each type of vehicle is going to be looking in different places. Vehicle going straight, they tend to want to see what's in front of them. Vehicle turning left, they're worried about the people they're turning left in front of. They may not even see the pedestrian. And people going right, they're worried about the vehicles coming from their left. They may not be looking for the pedestrian. So we do treat them differently because we need to think about solutions for those people in a different way. So keep that in mind. And of course, if people break the rules, go against the light, go against the walking symbol, people can get hurt. Now, in this particular case, the gentleman who walked against the crosswalk, the hand was up, they still walked, only broke their arm. So just so you know, turned out to not be as serious as the video shows. But now we get the vehicle going through a red light, crossing, conflict point, created a serious, could have been a fatal, very, very easily. Okay. And again, if we had stopped one of those 2, we probably would have had at most a crash, but not that real high chance of a fatality with a pedestrian. And why is that so critical? Well, it turns out speed really does matter when it comes to people who aren't inside that metal cage we call a vehicle. Okay. At 23 miles an hour, and yeah, it was originally done in metric, which is why it doesn't round to nice even US customary or imperial, for those who like that word. 23 miles an hour, if a pedestrian gets hit, it's about a 10% chance that they're going to be killed, about 22% chance that there's going to be a serious injury. So overall, about 1/3 of the time, it's a pretty bad accident. Okay. At 42 miles an hour, okay, and hopefully we don't get those kind of speeds at intersections in urban areas, but at 42 miles an hour, 50% chance of a fatality, 1/3 chance of injury, and only about 12, 15% that you're going to walk away with something that's not considered serious. And of course, if you get up to 58 or state speed limit plus a little, which we tend to see people drive, 90% chance that you're going to not be able to walk away ever. And a 99% chance of a serious kind of crash. Okay. So speed makes a difference. So as we're thinking about intersections, fundamentally, we want to slow people down. At the same time, we need to think about capacity. So that really comes down to geometry. There are tons of geometries for intersections. We'll talk about some of them, but let's talk a little bit about the geometry, the traffic control, crossings, things like that. We'll end with some miscellaneous ideas. Now, in terms of geometric standards, the most common is the AASHTO Green Book. That's really going to be the place you want to start. Here in New York State, you can go to the New York State Highway Design Manual, which is available online. It pretty much is the Green Book with some minor changes due to what New York State supports. If I had to pick one, I would probably go to the New York State Highway Design Manual because it's available online. But there are some things in the Green Book you might want to look at as well. For those who have low volume, there are some low volume standards. Most of the stuff on intersections in there is pretty much pointing at the AASHTO Green Book, just so you know. There's a little bit in there, but not a lot. It's a relatively thin document, really aimed at the widths and turns and curves. It's not really an intersection kind of document. So you really want to get access to the Green Book or the Highway Design Manual. Some people could develop your own standards, but the reality is you need standards that can support you if something does happen, you go to court. So my advice is go find a good standard like the Green Book or the New York State Highway Design Manual and go from there. Okay. Now, in terms of intersection alignments, this is just 8 that we list in our little handbook, our little book on road safety. T intersections, skewed intersections, Y intersections of different types, four-way crossings, highly skewed, weird ones with 5 or 6 legs. You've all seen those, and of course, roundabouts. There's all kind of variety of intersections. By far the most common is the four-way, okay? And let's use the four-way to start thinking about some of the issues with geometry that might make things a little bit safer. We'll come back and visit some of the intersections here in a few minutes. So let's look at a four-leg intersection. Standard, like you might see in an urban area. Typical crossing, nothing odd, too much about it, okay? So now, we didn't mention it, but we know trucks use these intersections, or it could be a bus, or it could be just even a single unit truck, okay? Even cars, to some extent, don't track nice and smoothly, okay? The goal is, you got your truck, he's coming up, he wants to take a right turn, okay? So the goal is for him to turn right and go around the corner. Now, you could draw a nice little drawing that makes a nice little smooth curve, but the reality is, as he goes around the corner, the back end tends to swing out some, okay? And then as he does that, we could draw a template of how that's done. And that's what we used to do. We actually have some here, plastic templates of drawing that you can put on a drawing, showing the templates of how things lay out. I actually like them because while the computer can do all this, and that's what the computers do these days, it's nice to be able to take a set of plans, put the templates down and see what is the effect, where is the vehicle going. And as you can see in this case, if it's a tight radius, it's going to be a challenge for that truck getting around the corner without hitting the curb, okay? So we have to think about that when we're laying things out. So there's the template that we have to deal with. So we don't want him to go over that corner. But we like having a fairly tight radius, okay? That radius makes it better for pedestrians. It's the shorter distance to cross over, okay? And so this is something to keep in mind. We don't want it to be too big of a round corner, because if it is, it makes it longer for the pedestrians. If you came in here and you made this flatter so the truck could get around, now the pedestrians coming down here on the sidewalk would have that much longer of a distance to have to cross over. We really don't want to do that. So just ask yourself, I'm in an urban area or even a non-urban area, what do I do about tight corners? What kind of solutions can you think of for a tight corner radius? Okay, give me some ideas for some tight corners. How would you deal with that? How do you deal with that now? How does traffic deal with that? You could do a multiple curve. Yep. You could increase the radius. You could push the stop bar back. Okay. Okay. You could put in a slip lane. If you had the space, you could put in a turning lane. We see that all the time, especially when there's space. Okay, that works really well in a rural area. May not, crossing over into the other lane. We see buses do that all the time here in the city of Ithaca, and you see that in most cities. The buses actually have to go over the center line to be able to make the sharp corner. Okay, that's not always going to be feasible. So as we're thinking about improving safety upon our intersections, we have to think about the vehicles that use that intersection. Okay, whether it be buses or whether it be single unit trucks, which are common, or even the once in a while semi that's coming in to bring in someone who's moving in. The neighborhood I live in, we had 2 moving trucks in the neighborhood yesterday. It's not really great from a standpoint of getting a truck in there, but luckily the traffic volume is such that they can get away with it once in a while. But if there's a high volume, that can be very difficult. For those of you who are from the New York City area, it's going to be really hard to increase the radius. It's going to be really hard to channelize. You couldn't put in a slip lane. So that can be a challenge sometimes. So again, just thinking about it from a fundamental standpoint, how do you deal with that tight corner radius? The other thing that last picture shows you is something on sight distance. We talked about that when we talked about the goals and what makes a good intersection. We want that sight distance. We want to be able to see. We want to see it as a driver coming up to an intersection so we know maybe there's traffic coming in. We need to be able to see it as coming from the side intersection, the minor road, to be able to know whether I can pull out safely or not. Okay. Now, sight distance, we've all known it's about that perception reaction distance and stopping distance. Okay. Before hitting a vehicle or hitting an object. Okay. Intersection sight distance is a bit more challenging because we assume the vehicle has stopped. So it has to accelerate, get up to speed to get into traffic. So the distances are actually pretty long. Okay. So there's not just the perception reaction or stopping distance that we see for stopping sight, but we also have that acceleration distance. So we actually have to add in a little bit more for intersection sight distance. And I could be wrong, but I don't think there's enough sight distance here. Okay. Yes, it's a yield sign, but there's really not enough sight distance. It probably works okay in this case because it's a residential area. It's really low traffic volume. Okay. And most of the traffic goes to the right. So there's not a lot of conflicts. But yeah, we need better sight distance than this. Okay. If you look at it, the sight distance, it's safe for right turns and left turns are varied. Okay. And there's also the crossing distance. Okay. And you can do the calculations, and it does vary, and there are some variations that exist. The most severe case is either the left turn or the crossing distance. The left turn, because you only have to get up to speed, but you have to get into traffic. And you have to look in both directions. Now, looking in both directions can be a challenge because you got to look once, then look again, and maybe look a third time. It actually adds to the time it takes to make the maneuver. Crossing, you have to get the entire vehicle across, and that can be a bit of a challenge with vehicles coming in. And so the more severe is the left turn or crossing maneuver in most cases. So you could actually come in here and do the calculations. And for passenger cars at 30 miles an hour, which is the most common urban speed limit here in New York, you need about 325 feet of sight distance in that sight triangle where the vehicle is sitting at either the stop sign or yield sign or no crossing control at all. At 40, it jumps up to 450. By the time you get to 60 miles an hour, which, let's be honest, a lot of people do that on the 55-mile-an-hour state highways, you need 660 feet for just a passenger car. You need even more if you're driving an SU truck because you got to get up to speed. And a tractor trailer might need as much as 1,000 feet of sight distance to really make the turn safely. That can be a bit of a challenge. Now, you're all going, well, how do I measure that? I got an easy way to measure the sight distance that you need. Don't use distance, use time. And actually, the nice thing about using time is that it works. This is what's fun about it. It works for the intersection already. You don't have to know what the speed limit is. The intersection will tell you whether it's safe or not. This idea actually comes from a gentleman who works for Albany County now, used to work here at the local roads program, named Jim Markle. And the idea is convert the distance into time. So you take the sight distance that's calculated, divide it by the speed times 1.47. You went, why did you do that? Well, sight distance is in feet. Okay. The speed is in miles per hour. And the 1.47 is feet per miles per hour of seconds. Okay. So that winds up, everything crosses out, and you wind up with seconds. And so what's cool about that is you can recalculate everything in seconds. And so for passenger cars, you need about anywhere from 7.4 to 7.7 rounded. Let's round that up a little bit. Trucks, 9.6 to 9.5. Tractor trailers, 11.3, 11.6. I think you can see where I'm going here. So stand at the intersection about the place where the vehicle would be stopped. A little closer for a passenger car, a little further back for a truck. You might have to stand off the road if there's a lot of volume and sort of adjust. But if you think about it, you need about 8 seconds. So if you're standing there and you don't have 8 seconds for a vehicle to go in front of you, if you're in a car, it's going to be tight. It's going to be a little bit of nerve-wrackingness when you have to pull out. So you really want that 8 seconds. For a truck, they need about 10 seconds. And if you're driving a tractor trailer, you'd really like 12. And you may have to think about restricting the traffic movements to make them turn right if there's not enough sight distance, or think about changing the traffic control, giving the right of way with signs or with lights. Okay, but it's a good rule of thumb. It works amazingly well, and it's a good way to check. So let's talk about traffic control. So we're going to talk about the most common traffic control techniques first: no control, yield, stop, and then jumping it all the way up to a traffic signal. Okay. So in the Pole EV, when is no control a good option? When is it actually a good option to use no control, no signs whatsoever? And by the way, this is still the most common. This is the most common method for traffic control. Some people say never, and mostly here in New York State and Eastern, you very rarely see no control. In the Western United States, you see it all the time. Okay? No accidents, very low volume, excellent sight distance. Yep. Okay. No parking getting in the way. Yeah. Urban areas, possibly minor, really residential. Yeah. Okay. This is what we think about when we think about no control options. This is a picture from the Midwest. You can see plenty of sight distance, low volume, under 400 vehicles a day, good sight lines. People aren't going to stop anyway. This is where you put up no control. I said it's the most common method we've got in New York State. How many of you have a driveway? If you're in a driveway, is there a sign? No. There's no stop sign, there's no yield sign, there's no traffic light unless you need it because of access to a parking lot or something. That technically is no control. Now, I know in New York State under vehicle and traffic, you're supposed to stop before you pull into traffic. But let's be honest, most people don't do so. It acts like a no control situation. And then people learn to adjust based on their own driveway. But really, it's no control we very rarely use, but it's something to think about. We really are using it in a lot of cases. So when is yield control a good option? This is not, I don't think, used enough here in New York State, but sometimes it probably shouldn't be used, like in that one case with the tree. When is yield control? A merging situation. Yep, merging is very common. Okay. Higher volume with clear sight distance. That's really important. Yep, good sight lines with low traffic. And again, some people say low, some will say higher volume. Skewed intersections. In some cases, we're going to come then talk about that. Highway entrances where you've got merging operations, possibly one-way intersections. But it still comes back to the idea of sight distance and think about, can people see? One way I like to think about whether you're going to use a yield sign or not comes out of our traffic sign handbook that you can look at too. And that is, as a vehicle is approaching the intersection, can they see far enough to where if there is a vehicle coming, they can stop. It's a good way to think about it. You're driving down the road, says yield, you look in both directions, you don't see traffic, you go on through. But you should have enough time to stop before you get to the intersection for any vehicles coming in. So that means you need to have sight distance, not just where you're standing at the yield sign, but far enough back to where you can stop. Now, you should be slowing down. You should probably be slowing down to 10 to 15 miles an hour. But still, you have to have time to stop. And you can do the calculations for that if you want to. Okay, so here's a good example. Plenty of sight distance in both directions. I didn't show you both sides, but there's plenty to the left. Great sight lines. You don't have a delay problem, a lot of traffic where you couldn't pull in. Okay, and again, you can still stop before you get to the actual intersection. So then, of course, when is stop control a good option? Okay, so tell me, when is stop control a good option? For sight distance, yeah. Okay, it's very busy, there's lots of traffic. Okay, so poor sight distance, lots of traffic, very busy. Okay, and could be just because there's high pedestrian volume. If you don't have that, how do pedestrians cross, or vice versa? How do cars get through if there's so many pedestrians? So yeah, we typically use stop signs to control who has the right of way. Okay, and whether we're going to use a two-way or a four-way, or whether we take into account accident history, this is all laid out pretty well in the MUTCD. Once you decide you're putting up stop signs, take your time, do it well. Okay, make sure the signs are high enough. I don't think this one is high enough by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, supposed to be at least 5 feet. In urban areas, 7 feet to the bottom of the sign, so you can walk under it. But do you do a two-way or four-way? Really comes down to the warrants, and is it worthwhile? But be aware. The one thing I don't want you doing with stop signs, and I see this happen too often, don't use the stop signs as speed control. It doesn't actually work. It actually causes delay, and drivers change their behaviors not in the way we want them to. This is actually out of Michigan where they did this. They actually had a roadway, and everybody was complaining because they already had a couple of stop signs on the roadway. Let's add one more. We'll make it even safer. Well, what happened, if you look at the speed limit, okay, it was about 30 miles an hour. 25 actually was the speed limit, because Michigan 25 is their state sort of low end speed limit. Before they had put up this extra stop sign, the blue lines you can see, the speeds were in the range of 30 to 35 miles an hour. And what people would do is they would slow down, wouldn't actually stop. They'd roll through the intersection, roll through the intersection. So they put up another sign at Price, and you would think, oh, we're going to stop people. Nope. What actually happened is they went faster between the signs, a little bit faster coming up to it, and then didn't actually stop. They were actually going 10 miles an hour through the intersection on average. Okay, so it really doesn't work as well as you might think. So you may want to think about other options. Traffic calming is one option you could look at, but be aware of the fact that stop signs in of themselves can actually create problems and do tend to lead to more rear end accidents. Hopefully property damage only, but those can be severe if the speeds get too high. So just be careful when you're putting up stop signs. Now, of course, at some point, you may need to think about using a signal. When is a signal a good option? When would we want to put up traffic signals versus just having a stop sign? Very high traffic volume, yep. A lot of left turn movements can't be made. A four-way isn't very, stop sign isn't very effective because of the volumes involved. Heavy traffic in one direction to give right-of-way assignment, yeah. Especially conflicting volumes, yeah, okay. I mean, if you look, Manhattan, almost every intersection is controlled with a traffic light because of issues of visibility, speed, capacity. All those things come into play. And you get high volumes, you almost have to think about that. There are warrants for that, okay? The warrants need to be met, but remember, there's going to be an economic issue involved, okay? They may cost more. you're going to have electricity, which maybe in an urban area is an issue, but somebody's got to pay for it. The one thing I will tell you, once you get to the point where you're thinking about signals, especially if you're not a professional engineer, go get one. Get somebody who has done this, understands what they're doing. And what kind do you use? Well, that varies. This particular one happens to be one that was only side mounted, not overhead. Now it's required that they're overhead because side mounted ones get lost. Okay. We've got an intersection here on campus where they're using only the side mounted ones, which there is a way to do it, but they've actually had to go to a four-way stop because one of them got damaged, and you have to have at least 2 lights at all times when you're not having overhead. And now they've got a four-way stop, which will be fun when the students come back because of all the traffic volume that's involved with both the students and the vehicles at that intersection. So again, how do you maintain it? Getting parts can be an issue right now with chain of getting things in. So keep that in mind. Now, again, what traffic control you've got, assigning the right of way, that's going to be a challenge for you. But let's go back and look at some of these other odd intersections. In particular, I want to look at 3 intersection types that tend to cause us a lot of grief. Now, the highly skewed one, we could also look at number 6 down there, but let's look at highly skewed. Let's look at the big Ys, especially the ones that are 2 legs coming off a delta, some people call those. And then we'll end with a little bit on roundabouts before we do some case studies to end the hour. Highly skewed intersections, they're way too common, okay? Really don't want to have a highly skewed intersection. This is the view that our friend Jim Markle, when he was working here, took when he was in his vehicle at an intersection with highly skewed, trying to look over his shoulder. Really hard to see. If it's designed with low speed and merging, that works pretty well. But if it's a high speed intersection, that can be really, really risky. Okay. What would we really like to have? Well, what we'd really like to have is we'd really like to have this at 90 degrees. Okay. So we really want the road to come in here at 90 degrees and align it. Okay. I didn't make it wide enough, but the idea is we come in here at perpendicular. In the Q&A, tell me, why do I want to be perpendicular, or at least as close to perpendicular as possible? Why is that recommended from an intersection standpoint? Why do we want to get rid of skews wherever possible? In the Q&A, give me a reason why we prefer perpendicular is at least as close as that we can get. It improves the sight line in both directions, and that's the key, in both directions, okay? Because now you can see left and right of equal amounts, okay? So yeah, we want 90 degrees. They'll tell you you can go off just a little bit, but we'll come back to whether that's a good idea here in just a couple of minutes. But yeah, it really is a sight lines issue, okay? And somebody made a good point. It does take less distance if you put a crosswalk here versus a crosswalk here. It's a lot shorter distance. There's actually an intersection here in Ithaca. They're redoing it. They're going to put a pedestrian island in the center of it because it's more skewed than you might realize. And it's really a long distance pedestrians to have to cross. So yeah, there's lots of good reasons we like to do that. Now, this is one place where they realign the intersection because they want to get rid of the highly skewed intersection. Do me a favor, if you go through the effort of realigning it, remember the vehicles using the intersection. And the longest vehicle that uses it on a regular basis, you want a tangent section in that perpendicular long enough to fit that vehicle. In this case, if the intersection has a lot of trucks, you're actually going to want to align your intersection such that, and make 2 lanes. I'll get my lane width better this time. There we go. Enough room for that tractor trailer in this particular case to sit completely tangent when it's stopped. Okay, it's longer than you might think. It turns out really important to have that vehicle straight before it makes its next maneuver, which is probably going to be from a stop situation. And of course, you need to think about the turning radius and the movements of that truck as it's going around the corner as well. But you don't want to be cutting it short what tends to happen if you do that is vehicles tend to cut the corner. And that's actually, as you can see, the vehicle doing it here. He's already cutting the corner. He's already over the center line, pulling into the intersection. And it can lead to head-ons, which are some of the most severe crashes that we can get, even at relatively low speed. Let's not rely on the airbag to keep people safe. Let's have them not actually hit each other if we possibly can. And you may need to widen it, which of course creates problems for pedestrians as well. So that's something to keep in mind for the highly skewed intersection. The Y intersection, okay, and there are lots of them out there. And I'm not going to say we need to go out and get rid of all of them immediately, but in the Q&A, what's the risk of these big Y intersections? Why is it something that we're a little concerned about when we see them? What's the concern? Put that in the Q&A for me. They're confusing. How do you do traffic control? Where do you put the stop signs up? I mean, who has the right of way? Okay. You may not be aware of others that are around you. In this particular case, we might have a stop sign coming onto this county road from a town road, but do we put a stop sign here? Do we put a stop sign up? Whoop. Get my pen right here. Do we put a little stop sign here? So we're going to have a stop sign here, a stop sign here. Who has the right of way at this part right there? Okay. And of course, people go through those things at high speed. Okay. So it's something you got to be aware of as you're rebuilding the roadways, as you're looking at them. You may want to think about options for these big Ys. A couple of options that exist, obviously the most likely one, let me get rid of all the ink here. And I'm going to change the pen color to a dark red so that you can see it, but it's not too hard to read. You could just bring the road in straight. Again, the radius would be set by the vehicles using it. You could do that. Really low volume. You might even be able to leave this turning lane. You might be able to leave a turning lane there. I've seen people do that very successfully. Okay. You might even be able to have a turning lane pulling into it. Again, depending on the traffic. But think about the users. Think about, is it pedestrians? Is it bicycles? Lay it out carefully and try to make sure that it's clear, easy to understand, and has good capacity. The one thing we want to be careful of with these big Ys, and another reason that I'm not a big fan of them with some situations, this one's not too bad, but I've seen ones where vehicles coming this way from the left think they can cut, make that quick turn, and mistime it with a vehicle going this way. That conflict can be very high speed. You're talking in some cases combined speed differences of 90 miles an hour or more. Very, very severe, very, very dangerous crashes. Airbags are not going to help you there. Okay, you really don't want to get that kind of crash. So think about that when you're doing that. And then of course, everybody loves the roundabout. Okay, now I haven't had you do this yet, but we're going to ask you, how many of you have roundabouts in your community? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have a roundabout in your community. Okay. So out of the 50 or so of you online, about a third have roundabouts. Actually getting above a third. Okay, so about a third of you have roundabouts. Okay. Now, I'm going to watch magically by hands. We're going to lower all your hands. How many of you would like to put another one in? You like them enough, you want to put another one in. Okay, okay, again, not quite as many of you. Okay, that's good. Okay. You may not have the space for it. Roundabouts aren't something you can put everywhere, but it's something to think about. Roundabouts are popular. Why do you think they're popular? Why do you think roundabouts are popular? In the Q&A, throw it to me. Why do you think we like roundabouts? Maintenance costs versus having a light. There's no stopping. You can main throughput, minimize the delay. You got fewer conflict points. Yep. Okay. Keeps traffic moving. No traffic lights. It actually is a safety issue. If we take and go back and look at the conflict points for a roundabout, as you can see, there's no crossing conflicts for the roundabout for vehicles. Put that in emphasis, for vehicles, only diverging and merging, which, while that does happen, tend to be property damage or low injury kind of crashes. Okay. Now, you still have pedestrian issues, and we still need to be careful because they tend to be higher speeds. So you have to balance the act between pedestrian versus non-pedestrian. But if it's done well, the pedestrians are only having to cross. Get my pen to work here. This short distance to a safety island, and then that short distance again to a safety island. And so it actually is not bad for pedestrians if it's done well. But think about the kind of pedestrians. If you got a lot of elderly or a lot of people who are having a hard time with speed, well, you might be wary about where you put that pedestrian crossing. Because again, the vehicle coming out of the roundabout may not be focused on the pedestrians coming around the corner. But it can be done very well. And we'll see if the video plays here. If the video will play. And survey says it's not finding it today. Of course. It found it earlier this morning, but it's not finding it now. But roundabouts can be very effective, but there's a challenge with roundabouts. Does anybody see the problem in this one? This is a picture that's been shown by lots of people. Okay, it was one of the first ones done out on Long Island by New York State DOT. It did a really nice job. Okay, but it's missing something. Does anybody see what it's missing? I've seen this in national presentations. And if somebody wants to know, I'll answer the question that you put in about a roundabout versus a traffic circle in a minute. Okay. The lanes are too wide. Relies on good deeds for motorists to let pedestrians cross. Okay. How do you get the bicycles through it? Okay. We tend to divert a little bit more than this early one that was done. There's not as much signage as we typically use or arrows to help people out. No, my biggest concern with this roundabout, it's actually not a bad roundabout. It's actually pretty well designed. Lays out the trucks to get around it. Nice job, mountable curbs, all that fun stuff. But think about a pedestrian crossing that sidewalk, or at the bottom of the picture. He gets across the sidewalk. Where's he going? There's no sidewalk. You start putting in crossings for pedestrians, think about where they're going. Do you want them on goat paths? Do you want them on grass? Do you need to put in a sidewalk? Okay. So there's a nice pedestrian island, but there's no sidewalk at the end. Okay. So think about the connectivity to bring people. Otherwise, they may wind up walking in the roadway, especially in the winter if you're not plowing the snow, and that's not going to be safe for anybody. Okay. So keep that in mind. Now, somebody asked the difference between a roundabout and a traffic circle. Traffic circle is the name we typically use for the old style that tended to either be fairly high speed and risky, or they're really tight, like you see in Washington, D.C. They still have traffic circles with multiple roads coming into them. They're not laid out really in the same way. A roundabout really is designed to slow vehicles down, but still have good capacity, okay? You can actually use a mini roundabout, okay, in an urban area. This happens to be in Ithaca, where they put just an island that sort of push people around, and you're supposed to go all the way around the mini roundabout. Do I see people cut the corner? Yeah, I see people cut the corner. But they actually can be fairly effective in a small urban area where you don't have a lot of right of way, if you don't have a lot of trucks. Okay, so in a residential area or a place where it's only single unit trucks, mini roundabouts can work. I was actually out in Seattle last week, and they're used all over the place in Seattle, not in the urban core where the hills are pretty steep, but in the residential areas, they use these an awful lot to help slow people down and sort of help control the right of way and get rid of some of the crossing maneuvers, or at least slow down the speeds that people can make for those crossing maneuvers. So those can be fairly effective. So we could cover more. We could spend a whole day. Actually, people do spend a whole day just on an intersection. Well, what I want to do is give you some of the fundamentals. And now what I want you to do is think about what would you do in some situations. I've got a few here. We'll finish our hour together with some case studies. It also meets our PDH requirement. But what would you do? So I'm going to first show you the picture, let you think about it for just 20, 30 seconds, and then we're going to pull up a poll everywhere that will let you put in your answers, okay? So we'll start with this first one. This is an intersection very close to my house. I walk by this probably at least 2 or 3 times a week because I take walks around town, and I go through this intersection quite often. Traffic volumes fairly low on the side streets. The main road is the one you see on the bottom right, going that way. Okay. What would you do? What are some possible problems and solutions to make that intersection better? Doesn't need to be better. Okay. So what are some possible solutions in that particular case? Either again, the pole EV, or if you prefer, improve the visibility of the stop signs, maybe a bump out for the pedestrians. There is parking allowed on that main road, by the way. Yeah. Maybe a four-way stop, but there's already quite a few four-way stops in the area. Align the curb and this crosswalk. Okay. Yield signs, I don't think there's enough sight distance for yield signs, but it's something to think about. I'd love to improve the sight distance, but I'm not sure we'd be able to because of right-of-way issues. The pedestrian ramps are certainly not big enough for any kind of people, even with their strollers. In fact, I actually like to use strollers as a design vehicle. So if you're not sure about whether or not your ramps are wide enough, think about the nice, really high-end strollers. Get a nice wide one. Be able to walk around town. If you can walk around town with the wide stroller for twins, you probably can get a wheelchair down. But if you can't, it's probably not good enough. Universal design actually works pretty well. What I found interesting is nobody came up with the one solution I was hoping you would, and that is come in here. Get my ink color white. It's the color we're supposed to use anyway. And assuming we put in a proper crossing for the pedestrians, put in ramps or no ramps, the lines for the intersection. Tells the pedestrians where to walk. It helps to find the intersection better. But yes, you do have to maintain it later on. But that can be a fairly inexpensive fix to help improve intersections in a residential area, especially where you don't want to put a lot of time and effort, but you could do a short-term fix before you do a long-term fix. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. Okay, let's look at another intersection. Now this is it's the old state highway here on the left. It used to come around the corner, became a town road. You can see where there was two town roads coming in from above, and if you drew this out from above, you'd actually have a sketch that looked like this color should work actually. There's the old state highway. There's two roads that come in here. Okay. There's a stop sign, as you can see here. There's a stop sign here. There's a stop sign here. And there's a stop sign here and a stop sign here. Interestingly enough, there's not a stop sign going straight. Okay. I'll answer, and the question somebody asked, by the way, was about the handicap build of steel plate. That wasn't a handicap ramp. The handicap ramps are actually off to the side. That's the drain inlet for a drop inlet that's right at the corner for that last one. Okay. So what would you do here in this particular case? And again, we're just going to add to the pile. So just keep adding. The new ones will show right up on top here. Maybe put in some yield signs. Think about places where yield signs might work. Maybe a four-way stop is needed in this particular case. Okay. Maybe you're looking at a stop sign going straight. Part of the reason they didn't want to do it is it's a steep hill. They want vehicles to be able to keep going up the hill and not have to lose all of their momentum before they went up the hill. Okay. Let's scroll down and see what else you guys had. Whoop. Went too far. Come on. I'm fighting with it. It's winning. Four-way stop, improve sight distance, maybe even looking at totally realigning that whole intersection area. But again, short-term versus long-term fixes, things like that you can fight with. Okay. We got one more here. This is a fun one. Here we have an intersection. You can see it right over the rise. The vehicle coming towards it. We're standing above the intersection. Here's at the intersection itself. Okay. Does that look like it's got a problem? So think about what you might do here. What are some possibilities for improvements and solutions? And I'm going to, this time I think what I will do, give me just a second to clear the responses. Okay, so what would you do in this particular case? Possibly change the vertical alignment so you can see that little bit of a dip, improve the sight distance. Okay. Maybe an intersection warning sign on the main road. Yeah. Maybe a flashing yellow. That's not a bad thought. Regrading the roadway, improve the sight distance. Okay. Okay, so all kinds of fun things people could come up with. But one thing I'm always want to do whenever I'm looking at an intersection issue is want to step back and think about what are the problems as well as what are the solutions. Great ideas you've got here, but let's go back and look at the picture real quick. It doesn't look like much, okay? But the roadway actually comes in. Main roads like this. The side road comes in at an angle. It's only about 10 degrees. I've exaggerated it actually a little bit. It's not much, but it turns out to be just enough to where vehicles sitting here at this lower corner couldn't quite see to the one direction. Okay, so they're having a hard time seeing. So stop bar, purposely making that stop bar actually a little bit steeper, sheeting a little bit, making sure that it's perpendicular, not parallel to the road, but perpendicular, makes it more exaggerated. That's all they did. They improved the safety of the intersection, along with a little bit of cleaning up of clutter. What are the problems? In this case, the vehicle's slight skew. Didn't see much. It was inside the standard, but the standard is always not always the only thing you got to look at. There's always other things that go on. Okay, so yeah, you may want to think about crosswalks and all kind of fun stuff. Now, if you'd like more information on local safety improvements, not just intersections, but all types of, especially rural areas, we have a couple of workshops being held around the state. Dutchess, Oneida, and Monroe counties coming up in August. We're low on numbers. I'll tell you right now. By the end of the week, we have to decide whether we're canceling it or not. And right now, we're in the cancel side of the house. So if you've got any interest at all in a much more detailed look at some safe systems issues and low-cost safety improvement, and you'd like to see PDHs, we actually have 3 workshops coming up in August. And then we have the additional summer webinars that I mentioned earlier, finishing with snow and ice at the end of the month. And the ones with the stars are worth professional development hours. With that, I stole a minute of your day. I apologize for that, but I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of this. Again, think about intersections. If you have any questions, just send me an email. I'll be glad to answer it at david.org or go to our website, NYSLTAP-CLRP.cornell.edu, or just search for us on the web. Google will find us pretty quick. Everybody have yourself a great day. Stay safe, stay well, be kind. Bye-bye.